The measurement functionality offers three variables: height, depth, and width on the material lines that can be used to calculate the consumption of the materials in production based on actual values of those three variables. On the material lines, it is also possible to select some fixed formulas that use the three variables. For example, how much wood will be used to produce a window frame with a given height and width. Measurements can be used to calculate the required material quantity of a BOM line based on planned measurements in the BOM and based on actual measurements in the production BOM. However, there is no integration to the actual measurements of a picked item when it is picked from inventory. The update of the actual measurements of a consumed material or component must be done manually in the production BOM. It then calculates the required inventory quantity based on the measurements, which will also be the basis of the cost calculation. The actual measurements are updated on the production order and will use the actual measurements during the estimation step to calculate the required inventory quantity for BOM lines that are set up to use those measurements. If we think of the window frame example again, when a production order is created for a number of window frames, the actual measurements for height and width are manually updated. Let's say the height is 2 meters and the width is 2 meters. In that case, the estimated inventory quantity during estimation is calculated to 2 times 2 times the production quantity. For example, if a company manufactures nested tables in sets of 3, each table is actually identical in terms of its production process and materials. The tables vary only in their height, width, and depth. When the company uses measurement configurations, they can make these nested tables by using one BOM. Rounding up is a method used to guide how the measurements and consumption will be applied. BOM measurements defined on the BOM lines. All BOM components that are required to make one finished item are shown on the BOM lines. On each BOM line, the planning calculations and consumptions of the material must specify the following: whether the item has any configurations and what the configurations are. Measurements are used for calculating the expected consumption of the component item on the BOM line. Next, setting up measurement configurations. Measurement configurations are defined on the Setup tab of the BOM line form. The following parameters must be specified: the measurement dimension formula that is used to calculate the consumption of material, whether the calculation is to be rounded. If it is, you'll need to specify how and by which factor. The relevant measurement dimensions in the measurement group. Once the setup is complete, you can calculate the consumption by running the BOM calculation or cost estimation in the production order. Cost estimation of the production order is not covered in this course. Let's switch over to AX and I'll show you how to do this on a bill of material. I'm here in the Product Information Management form and I'm already on a particular BOM. I'll go ahead and select a different item. For this example, I'll choose the power supply. Then on the Engineer tab in the Action pane, we're going to open up the BOM lines. Next, for the power cord, I'll need to configure a measurement. So I'll go to the Setup tab in the on the lower portion of the form. Here, I'll need to specify the formula. In the formula field, by default, it will be set to standard. When the standard option is selected, the consumption is not proportional to any dimension of the finished item, and the value entered in the quantity field is used for the number of the finished item. So in this case, it would just be one of the finished item. The next option is to select height times constant. This means that the consumption will be proportional only to the height. I would need to type the height measurement into the height field. The next option is height times width times constant. With this, the consumption is proportional to both the height and width. I would need to type both the height and width into the measurement fields on the right-hand side. Next is height times width times depth times constant. Again, this would be configured based on both the height, width, and depth. The last option is to use height times width times depth divided by density multiplied by the constant. With this option, you'll need to make sure that you specify the density as well. For all of these options, it's important that you type in the constant. This is a fixed volume or quantity that's required for production regardless of the quantity produced. The constant consumption is calculated in the following way. Quantity equals consumption times the constant. The last option is step consumption. When you select step consumption from the drop-down box, you'll be able to use the step consumption grid on the right-hand portion of the form. This allows you to configure multiple different consumptions based on a quantity being produced. For example, if 10 feet of the item are required to produce 1, but 25 feet are required to produce 2, then I could create the various from series and specify the quantity of the item that will be required when producing the number in the from series field. The other thing that's very important to consider is the unit. When you're configuring the unit for the item, you'll want to make sure that it's set to the correct unit of measure. For this example, it's set to each. If the power cord was provided or supplied in feet, I would want to change this to feet, so that way the measurements are going to be based in feet, not in inches. It's important that if you change the unit of measure, that the released product has a unit of measure conversion from the inventory unit of measure to the unit of measure that you've selected here. The next field to consider is the constant, or the consumption. You can select between constant and variable. When you select constant, this means that a fixed volume or quantity will be used. When you select variable, it means that the number of units in the finished item is proportional to the number of items produced. Variable consumption is calculated in the following way. It's the production quantity times the quantity from the bottom line equals the consumption. The unit consumption is equal to the quantity in the BOM. The last option to select is the flushing principle. You can select from Start, Finish, or Manual. When you select Start, automatic consumption is enabled when the user updates a production order to the Start phase. When you select Finish, automatic consumption is enabled when the user updates a production order to the Report as Finished phase. This is oftentimes referred to as back flushing. The last option is Manual. This means that consumption is not registered automatically and must be entered manually on the picking list. If you leave the field blank, which is the default, Manual is the assumption. Typically, with items that are being measured, you'll want to use a manual consumption so you can pick the actual quantity that you are using. So for example, although AX will calculate the height or the width based on whatever formula you've selected, I'll choose height in my example and say that 10 is the required length, and I would select feet in the unit of measure. With this particular scenario, when I perform the actual picking list on my production order, I would need to specify the actual number of feet. However, AX will calculate this based on 10 times 1. So if I'm producing 1,000 of this particular item, the calculated quantity that would be required is 1,000 times 10 times 1. When you're finished making changes to the bill of material line, then you'll want to perform a calculation. When you perform the calculation, you can do this directly from the BOM lines form by clicking Calculation. Then you'll want to select which costing version to use and select if it will be based on a production order or a production flow. I'll select a production order. If a route is available, I could select it here in the drop-down box. But for this example, we'll keep it simple and not use a route and click OK. You'll notice that I'm receiving an error message because AX does not know how to convert between feet and each. This is because the item is not configured with the unit of measure conversion. So I'll go ahead and change this back to each, and we'll just assume that it is set to feet. Run the calculation again, selecting the costing version and choosing production order, and click OK. Now you can see that some of these items received a warning during the calculation. In the BOM form, calculation form, you can see the details. If I want to see the summary, I can click the summary button, or you can click the complete button to view the details. Here, you'll be able to see the details of what was calculated, what the lot size is that's required. If you click through the various tabs, you'll be able to see the additional details of how much is required to make this particular item for a quantity of 1. The Prices tab will show you the extended price based on the calculation that was configured from the measurement. You can also click through the other tabs just as normal. When you're finished, you can close the form. It's important to remember that if you've made changes to the bill of material, that you'll want to activate and approve the bill of material before it can be used in the production process. Next, let's talk a little bit more about measurement conversions.